Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of We Should Talk. I am Solaris.
I am the senator.
Mr. Senator, how are you doing? It's been too long since we spoke last.
I am currently in grad school hell, Solaris. I'm writing papers, I'm grading papers, I'm doing just about everything that I don't really want to be doing right now, but hey, it's the grind. I know you know all about that.
Oh, just a little bit of law school, That's all right.
So yeah, this is a nice little break.
I was gonna say we're gonna give you a little break here from your studies, your rigorous studies, and we're gonna talk about capitalism with a conscience. And so, one of the things that's really getting in my craw, Mr. Senator, is really getting in my craw, and has for some time, is how we talk a lot in this country about the role of government. We talk a lot in this country about which budget is too big, which budget is too small. We talk a lot about, taxing people and whether, how much we should tax them. And we also talk a lot about supporting the poor or not supporting the poor, or how much we should support the poor and all this other stuff. One thing that really gets on my nerves is that we do not talk about just how much corporations and big business is subsidized by taxpayer dollars. And when I say something like capitalism with the conscience, what I'm saying is, why don't we talk about how our capitalism works? Why don't we seem to care as a people, as a country, as a society, not just that we have capitalism, but that we have a capitalism that functions for the greater good of society, that it's a capitalism that actually supports itself. Because one thing people, kind of these supposed pure market capitalists, love to talk about is how capitalism works. It's the best system on the planet. It's always been there. It's always worked in the past, as long as it's been given enough freedom and whatnot to work, and that it works today, and it's bright in this country. It works very well with our democracy, and as long as you don't get in the way, you don't muck things up with government, that it should be a self-sustaining, independent type of economic system. Well, one thing, that's just not true. It's not true in this country, because I've got a couple articles I want to talk about. A couple articles. We subsidize capitalism, taxpayers. Our capitalism is not standing on its own. Our capitalism is being subsidized by taxpayers. So take, for example, one Walmart. And yeah, I'm going to hate on Walmart for a few minutes. One Walmart in Minnesota costs the federal government $900,000 a year in taxpayer subsidies to their workers. These are people who make such little money working at Walmart that they have to be subsidized by the federal government, or shouldn't say have to, that the federal government believes that they are so impoverished that they should be subsidized, that the taxpayers believe that they should be subsidized. Okay? $900,000 for one Walmart. Now, you can't necessarily take one Walmart and say that's how all Walmarts are, but how about this? California taxpayers are spending $86 million a year providing health care and other public assistance to the state's 44,000 Walmart employees. That was by a study by the UC Berkeley's Institute for Industrial Relations. Or here, how about this particular gem? McDonald's announced on Monday, which this particular Monday was back in just 2 months ago, that it raked in $1.5 billion in profits in one quarter. That was the third quarter. Turns out McDonald's workers receive $1.2 billion in public assistance. So $1.5 billion a quarter and $1.2 billion in assistance. Now tell me.
I remember hearing about that.
Now tell me, Mr. Senator, how many periods are there in a quarter, right? 4. Yeah. And that means they are making approximately four times $1.5 billion in profits and they're receiving $1.2 billion in taxpayer subsidies to subsidize the low-wage employees that they have. Now, less than one quarter of their profit could pay for those employees. Less than one quarter of profit. Now, this is the other thing that gets in my crawl, is that you've got people out there who constantly talk about how great capitalism is, but they say that we can't raise workers' wages. We can't do it because we raise workers' wages and we can't afford to buy Big Macs anymore. Nobody was going to buy a Big Mac, or nobody's going to go to Walmart and pay an extra, however many cents or $1 or whatever it is would be for a pair of tube socks. Nobody's going to do that. But this example, this McDonald's example, to me, is exactly it's proof that they're wrong. It's proof that they're wrong. McDonald's could share less than one quarter of its profit. Profit, not revenue, not total income, profit with the employees that they employ to make sure that the federal government and state governments aren't subsidizing their profit, because that's really what we're talking about here. If our capitalism is a stand on its own, Mr. Senator, I believe that we should pay employees a livable wage before we get profit. Or in this case, let's just share the profit a little bit. Let's just share. Walmart, McDonald's, major fast food companies, so on and so forth. What do you think about that, Mr. Senator?
Yeah. So here's my thing with that. I agree with you in spirit. I think that it is. I mean, this is an issue where my inner populist comes out, and when I hear about the profits that are being made by some of these large corporations, Walmart included, and you hear about the statistic that is often cited about the Walton family, and that their collective wealth between them, these 6 people, is more than 40% of the wealth of the nation, people in the nation. You hear stats like that, and you go, "What? I mean, what is going on here?" My problem with the whole and we can have a further discussion about this. While I agree in spirit that, theoretically, McDonald's, Walmart, large corporations that have workers that are not being paid up to par, theoretically, Walmart and Target and McDonald's should cut into their profits to pay their workers more. Now, what that more is, I don't know. And what a livable wage is, I don't know.
Right.
And that's the thing where you get into the weeds, because what is a livable wage? What is a workable wage? At what point do we not cut into the profits? Where do we stop? Where do we place it?
How about McDonald's example? How about they just pay their worker? They just don't have any government subsidies for the workers, and the way they do that is they just pay their employees a livable wage, such that they pay employees enough that they don't have to be on government assistance. How about that?
Okay.
Is a basic barometer.
So if you pay them enough so that they don't have to be on government assistance, what does that mean? And here's my thing. Okay, so I'm getting a livable wage. I'm an individual. I'm just a generic person, and I live in a 2-bedroom apartment. Say I live in New York City. A 2-bedroom apartment would probably cost me like $1,500 a month. And say I have a brand new iPod, what they call those things now. I have a plasma television. I have the platinum package, cable, whatever. I have a lot of luxury items. Now, I'm not saying everyone in this position would be having luxury items. What I'm saying is I'm now being paid a living wage so that I don't have to worry about paying for my food and paying for my housing. But now I'm being paid a living wage where now monies is freed up for me to purchase all this other stuff that has nothing to do with my food and my housing. You know what I mean?
No,
you understand what I'm trying to say?
No, not really. Maybe it's because you broke up a little bit there. What do you mean?
So what I'm trying to say is, for each individual, living wage is something different. And for one individual, living wage is an actual living wage, and for another, living wage is getting paid to purchase a lot of luxury items.
Well, okay, that's fair. But I mean, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But I want to get back to this idea about how corporations should cut into profits. Like I said, theoretically, I think it's a good idea. My problem is I think it's a little delusional. And the reason I say that is we always say, and if you listen to the language when we talk about this, corporations should have a conscience. Corporations should blah, 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 blah. But they're not going to, period. And that's just the bold reality. Corporations should and can afford, if they cut into their profit, to hire more workers and pay more workers more wages or higher wages. But corporations will not. So what happens is you raise the minimum wage, and what's going to happen is they're just going to not hire as many people, and they're going to pay those few people more, and they're going to pay, and then the rest of those folks are going to be out of a job. Now, is that fair? No. Does that happen in every case? No. But the reality is most corporations will not give you the living wage before the profit. That's not what corporations are in business for. They're in business to make a profit. But I guess the conscience part of it, I think, is one of the is a normative argument. And the problem with the normative argument when we're talking about policy prescriptions is that sometimes it's too normative and it's not realistic. And so now we're out there clamoring for something that is never going to happen. And in the meantime, the things that we can fix or the things that we can do, we're not doing because we're marching franchise, small business owner somewhere. Go ahead, what you say?
Well, I guess so. I agree with you that maybe it's delusional. I don't think I disagree with that. But my point is that it may be less delusional if society valued it. If before they went and shopped, they said, "Hey, wait a minute. How does this company that I'm about to spend a bunch of money on, or a bunch of money at, or whatever it is, how do they treat their employees? Do they pay their employees well? Maybe I'll go to a better here." And this is a great example, actually. I think that companies will respond if we value it. So Costco versus Walmart provides the best example I can think of. Costco and Walmart have the same business model. They're basically gigantic warehouse. Well, I should say Sam's Club. Same business model. They are gigantic warehouses. They have membership kind of sign-up clubs. I mean, anybody who knows anything about Costco and Walmart know they're basically identical. And if you were to walk in a Costco that was actually a Walmart, but they changed the sign on you, you probably really wouldn't tell the difference other than the signage inside. I mean, they're very similar. Now, Costco pays its employees an average of $44,000 a year. Walmart pays its employees an average of I think it's $17,000 or $18,000 a year. I mean, that is a huge difference. And I guess Sam's Club employees, I guess I should be more specific. Sam's Club employees. Why can't Walmart and Sam's Club up it a little bit? The idea that if they pay more, they're going to lose business is a load of junk, because you need look no further than Costco. So the first step, I think, is, and what I want to talk about is that this idea that you cannot, and people believe this, Americans believe this, that you can't raise worker pay because if you do so, it's gonna drive the price up of everything, and those workers who would getting more pay would therefore be being charged more for all the same things that they want, and therefore not really
that's what I was going to ask.
Earn any benefit.
Is there a price differential? I've never been into Costco, so I can't speak on this subject.
They compete now. I'm sure that it depends on the. I'm sure it depends on where you are in the country, but I bet in the same areas, I mean, they are competing for business, and they're in competition together. So you can have a business model that works. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of, if there's anybody out there who's like some kind of like data market research specialist, maybe they could send us some information that showed just how different they were. But from everything I understand, they're basically identical. They're basically identical, except one has a slightly thinner profit margin, which is Costco, but they pay their employees are much more than Walmart does. But my point is that first, Americans have to believe that it's possible that you can have your capitalism that is self-sustaining, not dependent upon government, not dependent upon taxpayer subsidy. Before we can even get to what you're talking about, the delusional thing, before we can even get to taxpayers saying, I value shopping at businesses that pay their employees livable wages because you know what? I value A, employers treating their employees well, but also B, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to subsidize their profits, which is ultimately what we have in this country.
We're in firm agreement on that. The subsidy thing, and I don't know, again, we probably need to have like some kind of expert in here talking about why these subsidies exist in the first place, other than sort of what I would just cynically assume is just one of those lobbyist situations.
Well, by subsidy, I just mean like, by subsidy, I'm just talking about Americans who are paid welfare and food stamps.
Subsidy.
Yeah, indirect subsidy.
You mean indirect subsidy?
I'm not talking about now. You want to talk about
I'm talking
corporate
about
welfare?
Subsidy like subsidizing the oil company subsidy.
No,
that's a legit subsidy
and legitimately ridiculous.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. But I see what you mean by paying the workers less. They're then not having to go out and get snaps and getting Medicaid or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And that is an indirect way of I see. I get that.
But both you raise a good point. Let's go to the context of oil and gas. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, BP, the most profitable corporations on the planet. We are talking about profits that far exceed even Walmart. Okay, humongous, vast sums of corporate money and power. And they are still subsidized to the tune of billions of dollars every year. And when they went in front of Congress, they admitted they probably don't need the subsidies. They admitted that. I mean, how if you have trillions of dollars in profit every year and you're being subsidized to the tune of billions, how could you possibly argue any other way than to say, yeah, we probably don't need it? But guess what they got? They got their oil subsidies, they got their gas subsidies, and it's unexplainable to me. It makes absolutely no sense to me that we support as a country. I'm not talking about laws here. I think that's very important. I'm not talking about minimum wage. I'm talking about as citizens of the country.
Tax code.
Yeah, I'm not talking about tax code. I'm talking about you and me and Bob and Suzanne and all the other people that are out there, citizens of this country who shop, who buy things. Why don't we, stop believing in this BS idea that you can't raise employee wage without sacrificing, you can't raise employee wage without thereby increasing the cost of goods, because we already know you can make that up with some profit. And B, why aren't we being conscientious about the people we give our money to? I mean, you think about this.
At the end of the day, like corporation, everyone is in it. I mean, that is a
you're breaking up.
Way
You're breaking up.
It.
I'm sorry. Repeat what you said.
I said because just like the corporation, everyone is in it for their own self-interest, and that's a very cynical way to look at it. But at the end of the day, if you are a person who doesn't make a lot of money and you don't work at Walmart, I don't know, say you work at McDonald's and you're shopping in Walmart, you're going to appreciate that the cost of the product in Walmart is cheap, and you're not thinking about what the person who's working there is getting paid. Same way if you work at Walmart and you're going to McDonald's You don't care how much the employee is getting paid. All you know is that you just bought a double cheeseburger for $1. That's all you care about.
And you're going to pay for it in an hour.
You said what?
You're going to pay for it in an hour.
Exactly. Yeah, you're going to pay for it now, certainly. But what I'm saying is everyone has their own perspective, and they go into these situations concerned with their own pocketbook.
Yeah,
And there isn't this sort of this, like I said, there isn't this sort of large scale, macro normative idea of how society is supposed to work outside of, the only time we think large scale, macro, and normative is when there's a presidential election. That's the only time when people actually think beyond themselves. And even then, you probably get a lot of individuals who are thinking outside of just like a normal party ID, who are thinking about what's in it for them. And so you just don't, that's just not a part of we're not a collectivist, sort of egalitarian sort of society. We are individualistic, and we think, what is going to be in this for me? How is this going to serve my family and my interests? And unfortunately, that means that we're just not wired, or we haven't been wired to think about what is my fellow man being paid here in Walmart, unless you work at Walmart.
See, now,
and then if you're at Walmart and you're getting a paycheck, you're more grateful to be getting that paycheck than you are with screaming at this. It's like fighting City Hall.
Yeah.
You're never going to think, oh my goodness, if I stand up to these people, then we're going to get a raise in our checks. No one is thinking that. They're thinking, if you don't shut up, because I've worked at Walmart, I've worked at Target, I've worked at Kmart, I've worked at all these places, and they make it very clear, the management, when they show you DVDs and certain things, they don't want people thinking about unionizing.
Oh yeah.
And so, and they make it very clear, and the people who work at these places believe the line. They believe that by unionizing, that is going to be a detriment to themselves and to their paychecks. And so you have a situation where even the cultists, you have people who are not trying to challenge the corporation to get a higher wage. They're grateful to have the job. And so that even tempers some of this populist sentiment to raise wages among the Walmart employees and the McDonald's employees. And then it makes it really difficult for McDonald's, because McDonald's is a franchise. So in some situations, you got workers who are protesting not the corporation McDonald's, but the small business guy.
Right.
He owns like 2 or 3 McDonald's. He will fire people. He's not going to cut into his profit, because he's probably not getting $1 billion profit. He will let people go and pay less people. And then I know in some instances, because I know several small business owners, where they will let people go, and then they'll be the ones working on the floor because they can't afford to pay somebody. They got to do it. So it complicates it, I think. Go ahead.
I think the franchise is a really good. I think you make a really good point there. I don't think that should be. I think that's more of an excuse than it is a real reason, because I think McDonald's, as part of its franchising business, could easily afford to pay its employees in the form of, hey, you will pay us less franchise fees if you actually pay your employees more. So just as kind of right off the top, I find that could be potentially a very convenient excuse. But at the same time, I realize the franchisees themselves, I think that is a tough position for them. But I want to push back on something a little bigger, much more central to your argument. I really don't think people are being, quote unquote, self-interested as much as I think people are being short-term interested, short-term focused. Look, what happens, let's say somebody's making poverty. They're in poverty and they're making very little money. If you give them $10,000, that money is going to go right back into the economy, because what they're going to do with that $10,000 is they're going to go and spend it, because $10,000 is a big deal, right? That's a big deal to somebody who's making $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000. They're not going to start bankrolling that. They're not going to start some kind of stock portfolio out of a $10,000, right? They're going to basically try to meet their needs in a much more basic way, as opposed to relying on things like, assuming they'd be kicked off of things like welfare, whatnot, because they'd be making $10,000 more. So that money is going into the economy. What are they going to do? They're going to go over to Walmart. They're going to go to McDonald's. They're going to go to all these different places, and they're going to actually buy stuff. We are still a consumer-driven economy. We are an economy that is, focused on consumption. 70%, I think, or something like that, is based upon consumption. And in such an economy, the way you get economic growth is by people buying stuff. And what means do people have to buy stuff? Well, that's called money. And if you give them more of it, they're more likely to spend it. We're not talking about giving people who are over $1 million an extra, $15,000. What are they going to do with $15,000? They're going to save $15,000. They're going to invest in the stock or whatever it is they're going to do, because they already have plenty of money. The other thing is, we talk a lot in this country, the idea that people aren't interested in this. We talk a lot in this country about the size of government. People care very deeply about the size of government, about how much debt we have, about the deficit that we have every year, and we have an entire portion of the Republican Party elected almost solely on the idea that the government debt is too high. And
but think about how they frame that.
Well, how they frame it is I'm sorry, go ahead. What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is they frame the debt and deficit. They even frame the debt and deficit from a individualistic perspective. That is, it's bankrupting our children. I mean, that is the line that you hear.
Fine.
So even then, you're thinking the government, by having a deficit, is reaching its hand in my pocket or my children's pocket and taking money out.
Okay, I'll work with that.
Go ahead.
Oh, I work with that. That's fine. I can totally concede the point on that one. But what they're not seeing is the connection between them wanting to kick people off of welfare if they're not working. That money that they're so concerned about, the welfare money, consider all the different government kind of things that government does. They're very, very concerned about how much money government's spending on poor people, yet they don't give a damn about how much, or at least many of them don't give a damn about how much the employers are paying those people. Why is those people would not have to be subsidized by the federal government were their employers paying them a livable wage? Why is all of the onus on is all the argument on the size of government and not on whether or not our capitalism has a conscience, whether or not our capitalism is actually being true capitalism? Because right now, it sounds more a lot like subsidized capitalism.
Okay, well, my response to that, and I agree with you, and I don't think we have a disagreement on the capitalism with the conscience and all that. I think that people in this country, that we are reared to celebrate business, and sort of on the opposite of that, we are reared to look down upon government assistance. And even in the situation where the businesses are forcing people into government assistance, it's a little like what we do when we blame the victim. And when people, when we blame rape victims and things of that nature, we never really focus our attention on the individual who caused the rape. We're asking a bunch of questions of the person.
Did she dress too sexy? Was she out late at night? Did she drink something?
Exactly. So in this sense, we shun the people who are on government assistance on SNAP because we see them as takers. We see them as people who are on the government dole, who are, living high on the hog and taking money out of our pockets. And they are not seen as the victims, even if from a more broad sense they are. And we're not asking questions about why these people are in the position that they're in.
That's right.
And so I see it as a perfect parallel. It's more victim blaming. It is what we are reared to do in this country, unfortunately. But and we've kind of been all over the place on this in this conversation, but I like it because it's all sort of tied together. Because at the end of the day, I don't think this has to do with capitalism with a conscience. I don't think it has to do with capitalism or with wages or anything of that nature. I think it has to do with sort of the character of our society, and more so how we are conditioned to think about a lot of different things from a young person onto an adult, in every sphere you can think of: educational, political, personal. We're all reared to think on an individual basis, and all reared to believe in sort of this American dream: pull yourself up by your bootstraps, this sort of thing. And because of that, when we start to get in sort of this collectivist ideal on certain things, people react in not the most positive way. But I want to talk about, because I was just having this conversation, as a matter of fact, it was on Thanksgiving. A friend and I were driving to Illinois, and we're going to Thanksgiving dinner, and we had saw a man who was homeless. It just sparked this long conversation about poverty and homelessness, and of all things, the cost of food. And one thing I think flip of the coin when we talk about fast food restaurants and fast food corporations, and they are pushing working class people onto the government dole. The flip side of that is, and I said, I wonder if somebody's done a study on this. How many people a year does fast food, how many poor people a year does fast food feed, because the food is so cheap? And is that important as well? Is that something that we should, come into account? Because I remember watching the documentary Food Inc.
Yeah.
And in there's the scene with the family where the husband and the wife were, I can't remember, I know the mother was there. She had children, and they were in the fast food drive-through at Burger King, and she said, "Look, I'm a working mother. This food is cheap and it's fast, and I can feed my family and keep it moving. Whereas I can't afford to be going to what's that real sedity grocery store that they have where they have all the organic food?
Whole Foods.
I can't afford to go to no doggone Whole Foods and spend $300 on a half a week's worth of groceries. And so is there a civic contribution being made by these greedy corporation fast food companies who are feeding poor people every single year with cheap food?
I guess, Mr. Senator, it depends on your definition of food and feeding. Because they're not going hungry and dying. Well, not going hungry and actually feeding people are kind of different things. I mean, they in one sense, at some point you have to have calories, right? At some point you have to have.
Right.
It doesn't, whether it's in the form of nasty ass processed meat product or nasty ass processed cheese product on top of a nasty ass bun product. With goop smothered on it, crumpled into a little thing.
Don't forget the liquid.
That's right. You gotta have the
sugar.
half-gallon of high fructose corn syrup. Drinking that over the course of an hour. It's like, if you call that food, okay. I get at some point you need calories. I get that, and you don't want people to literally starve to death. But there's two answers to that. The first answer is that ends up, in the short run, it might make sense, but in the long run, it ends up just swelling healthcare costs. And the second comment is that doesn't explain why people who can afford to eat not whole foods, but to actually eat real foods, Don't eat real foods. Don't buy real foods. Don't go grocery shopping. Don't actually spend money on a decent meal as opposed to the worst
'Cause it's too
possible
doggone
meal that
expensive.
money can buy.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
I was
you know,
listening.
go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Finish your point. I was just saying because it's too doggone expensive. That's what I.
No, I appreciate that. I really do. But a lot of time people underestimate how cheap good food actually is. You know, I went to the store and I went to the farmer's market. Now people are, elitist farmer's market. Oh my God, he's going there and spending $60 on a pork loin, right? No, I'm not. I could, but I'm not. Look, I went and I bought 2 bags of apples. It must have been. I don't know how many. I don't know. It was a bushel. I don't know, whatever, a bushel. Whatever. Point is, I got apples for less than $1 an apple. Okay, now which is more nutritious, an apple or a $1 burger from McDonald's? Now you tell me, how much farther could you go on an apple versus a $1 burger? It's not just about it's not just about feeding. Many people, it's about ignorance. It's about a lack of education about how you can get cheap food. There's another good example. My girlfriend runs a community garden. Now, this is not a community garden where you spend a boatload of money to get involved and so on and so forth. This is a community garden that lives off of grants. And it's supposed to be a community garden whereby if you're poor and you're hungry, come eat food. Not just
Right.
a nasty burger product, which I'm not going to call it a burger because it's really not real meat. I mean, anyway, if you don't have to eat that for $1. You can come take a bunch of tomatoes for free. You can come raise a garden for free. You could raise your own crops for free, not a dime. And so for a lot of people, it's not just about getting calories. I get that there are some places in this country that are food deserts, you know, especially a lot of places in the city. There's not a lot of options for people other than fast food, other than like, you know, corner gas station markets and junk like that. I totally appreciate that, and that's a problem that I think we should work on addressing. But for most people, I think the real issue is a lack of education about the products, and of course, a lack of education. You know, you in one conversation, we are talking about society's values. We're talking about capitalism. We're talking about healthcare costs. We're talking about calories and good food and bad food. And we're talking about, you know, middle class people versus poor. We're talking about government subsidies. All of this
crony
stuff.
Capitalism.
This stuff is intertwined.
It
and
is.
you know, education matters because, you know, somebody who knows that you can go and get an apple for less than $1, a good apple, a organically grown, natural, delicious, nutritious apple. Now they're not
I'm
going to.
down for that.
I mean, I'm telling you, this kind of stuff is out there. Vegetables can be extremely cheap. I go and get a group of 5 bananas, you know, for like $1.50, $2. We're not talking a huge amount of money. That's 5 or 6 bananas compared to a $1 thing on the dollar menu. So that woman who's sitting there feeding her family at McDonald's every day, in the long run, is probably spending more money supposedly saving money.
Oh, no doubt.
And she's probably driving up the healthcare costs of the system. She probably is causing herself to pay more deductibles for healthcare in the long run. Her children are probably eating more because they're addicted to sugar and they're addicted to fat and they're addicted to salt. If they were eating healthier meals, they might weigh less, and people who weigh less eat less. People who eat less eat less. That may sound crazy, but believe it or not, one of the best ways to save money is to simply eat less. Now, if we're talking about people who are starving and they have $1, they only have $1. You know what? They might just go get themselves a burger from McDonald's because, damn it, life is short, and I don't want to go and eat some very nutritious apple. But if we're talking about a mother who has to feed her children every single day, you know, this is kind of what I'm talking about. That let's not make McDonald's into some kind of hero saving our country from making sure the poor get fed. Okay?
I was just introducing it as a subject because that was something that we were talking about. I, I was being provocative and
Well,
asking the question. I think you answered the question well.
that's what this show is all about, Mr. Senator. The
Absolutely.
provocateurs and the provocateurs. We're all provocateurs here. So
Absolutely.
what do you think? I mean, to me, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he is a conservative. He believes that he was against the auto bailout, for example. He is somebody who very much dislikes people being on welfare, and he dislikes the concept of welfare. He hates minimum wage laws at the same time. And he will not... I mean, actually, I should say this. He didn't seem to have a decent argument against this idea that corporations should be doing this stuff. I guess as long as we're not forcing corporations to do the right thing, in his book, it doesn't matter. And in my book, it's like, yeah, but you're claiming that you believe in capitalism when, in fact, you don't. You're saying that we live in a capitalist country, and we sort of do, right? I mean, there's many companies that don't. That have wonderful organizations that pay their employees livable wages or very close to livable wages and don't really take that much from the federal government and from state governments. But it's like he would agree with me about corporations and businesses having a conscience and actually paying people a decent amount of money until you start forcing the corporations to do that, which gets back to what way can we do this other than forcing them, by law at least? And that's why I was trying to tell my friend, you don't just have to pass a law. You don't have to pass a law. You can do this in another way. And it's the same way that we control our politics. It's the same way. It's we choose to do so. We make the choice. We educate ourselves. We think about the options that are out there. We don't just blindly get up and go to Walmart every single time we want to buy something. We ask ourselves, is there anybody else out there who's carrying this product who maybe I might pay an extra 10 cents, right? But I'm going to actually be paying a person a livable wage. I mean, we're not even talking about just how bad for the economy Walmart ends up becoming in the long run, right? How many small businesses Walmart puts out of business every single time they move into an area, right? You might save shoppers a lot of time, and shoppers, at least in the short term, think they're making a lot of money or saving a lot of money. But when you have a Walmart that comes in, it takes 1,000 jobs from a bunch of small businesses and converts it to 200 jobs and provides really barely livable wages. Your economy didn't improve, ladies and gentlemen. You might feel it when you shop there that it feels good, but that's no more than just just ignoring the big economic picture. So I think my message to people out there is we don't necessarily have to pass laws on this. We have to choose it to be true. We have to choose the country we want. We have to make sure that we're supporting the organizations that we like, just like a political candidate. We don't have to pass a law that elects somebody. We can just elect the person. We can just choose to go to the poll and vote for that person. And if we're talking about a corporation that's out there that we know does bad business, or not bad business, but we know costs the taxpayers a lot of money, if you are a foam-at-the-mouth conservative who hates taxpayer subsidies, who hates federal government spending money, why don't you consider going to Costco? Why don't you consider going to instead of shopping at McDonald's, why don't you shop at a local, a different fast food chain that doesn't pay their employees horrible wages? There are fast food chains out there that do that. And a lot of them, they're small businesses. They're not actually fast food chains. You can go to a local burger shop and get a great burger purchased from local farmers, from local growers, and you can actually get, you might pay an extra $1, but if you want to eat a burger, you're probably not so concerned about I mean, you want something tasty, right? If you really want to just have something to live off of, go buy a $1 apple from a farmer's market, or go buy some vegetables from a Kroger or wherever it is that you're shopping. That's my point. Let's vote with our money. That's what I'm saying.
It's so interesting. I shock myself sometimes because I remember just 10 years ago, well, maybe not that long ago. Yeah, probably 10 years ago, I was fairly rigidly conservative on just about every single issue. And it was sort of reactionary. I was new to politics. I was still feeling my way through. And you know how you are when you're young and you haven't really experienced some things. You just sort of take things as you hear them and you believe them as gospel. And now here I am. I sit 10 years later and on a litany of issues. I find, which is why I don't carry a party label or even an ideological label, because I find myself jumping all over the place on the issues. And on this matter is where I disagree with you. And this is where my conservative compatriots' heads would explode with what I am getting ready to say.
Uh-oh.
And that is, I think that welfare programs and SNAP programs are necessary and good things. I don't think that in an economy that is built on underemployment, debt, and unemployment, that we can, of any conscience, claim that welfare programs and SNAP benefits and children's health care benefits are somehow a problem. That is the problem, when that is probably one of the least of our problems. And so I don't understand, as someone who is right of center on a lot of issues, I don't understand why so many find themselves arguing against government assistance programs when we have an economy that is not, we have a country and we have an economy that is not set up with an equality of opportunity. So if we don't have that equality of opportunity outside of some delusional idea, some political rhetoric, then you can't in good conscience argue that we don't need programs like this. That's one. Two.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I want to hear I didn't know you had a two. Go ahead.
Two, I think we do need to pass laws. This is where I would definitely say pass laws. And this is where my conservative compatriots, I don't know, the other limbs would explode. Because if we're talking about this, see, I don't necessarily agree with a across-the-board minimum wage increase. And the reason I say that is because I think a lot of small business owners will suffer through that. And in turn, a lot of small business employees will suffer through that. I think there's much to be said about corporations that make crazy profits, who are sitting on profits or reinvesting in themselves and not necessarily in the community or betterment of society. Now, that's not to say the corporations don't use some of their profits for charitable causes and things of that nature, but if you're sitting on $1 billion of profit every year and you're fattening the wallet of your CEOs and board members, we've got problems. So I think you have to have some sort of profit trigger. I don't know. And I'm completely pulling this out of left field. I haven't even really given it a whole lot of thought. But I think that we have to have some sort of trigger put in place that if you're making a year as a corporation making so much money in profits, then you have to pay your workers a living wage. You just have to. You have to. You're making too much profit. Period.
How about this? How about a law? How about a law that says at the end of the year, you have to, if your profits exceed the amount of money that the federal government subsidizes your employees, you have to pay your employees a end of the year bonus that will make up that
something
difference.
Like that.
And
something
you have
like
to pay
that.
it out of your profit, off of profit, not necessarily. Of course, what
you
that
can't
does
be raising
is that
prices and things in that. Yeah.
What that does is that creates an incentive for companies to have quote unquote less profit. So they'll figure out a way to siphon off the so-called profit, call it something else. Put
That's
it
why
off
we have
books,
oversight.
Reinvestment. Well, then you're talking about a lot of regulation, and that starts pissing
We
off.
already have regulatory agencies. They just have to do their job. We already have regulatory agencies. They just don't do their job because a lot of them are filled with individuals who came from the private corporation that they're now overseeing. There's your problem. So again, like I said, on this issue, my inner populist comes out. It's just so much crap and corruption that goes on. I just watched the film The Dallas Buyers Club.
Oh.
About the AIDS epidemic and the pharmaceutical companies and all sort of the politics and the corruption that goes in with the testing of new drugs in the market and how the FDA chooses what goes out and what doesn't go out, what gets tested, and it's just another example of where our regulatory agencies are compromised, and that's where we should. I don't think we'll have any problems overseeing something like this and making sure the companies are being honest about it, because if we have the will to fix the agencies that are supposed to be overseeing them. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking about how this conversation has now turned to our problems with agency capture. And how agency capture is really the problem here, Mr. Senator. We got to fix that agency problem. Capture problem. You know, it's just one more thing to add to the list. You know, I'm sitting here ranting and raving against everyday consumers. Even, you know, I can, you know, fine. If you're poor, whatever, go eat a burger at McDonald's. Like, okay, I get that. You know, I really do. But what about the middle class people? What about the middle class people who don't need to spend 10 cents on tube socks? They can spend 20 cents on tube socks by going to a place that pays their employees a little bit more. You know, I guess I rail against this because to me, it's totally incomprehensible. Every time I talk to somebody about this, they're like, yeah. And then they just keep doing it. Oh, I'm going to keep shopping at Walmart. I don't care what you say. I've had people that have made me we have some kind of bet going on, and they'll ask me to wager something that's pretty significant. You wager me $100, and I'll be like, all right, I'll wager you $100, but if I win, you can't shop at Walmart ever again. And they're just like, oh my God, end of days, apocalypse. I can't possibly think about not buying something at Walmart. It's like people. We talk about people will foam at the mouth. They will vote. They will be it will go campaign door to door to door to end government welfare programs, but they'll go to Walmart. It is just.
What are you going to say?
Blows my mind that these people. I mean, we're talking about like 90%, but a huge number of people. We're not just talking about poor people. We're talking about middle class people here. I mean, I'm talking about my parents. I'm talking about people who hear me say the words that I'm saying right now. They see all the facts. They see the income inequality. They see the massive profits. They see, my parents they don't rail against government subsidies of unemployed people or poor people, but but they know people out there exist. And it's like no matter who I talk to, be it liberal, conservative, moderate, they just kind of nod their head. And they go right back to doing what they're doing. They don't care about small business.
It's called cognitive dissonance. But what were you going to say? And we all suffer from it somewhere. I'm
not sure what I was.
We're all full of contradictions, but
what I was going to say is this idea that welfare is it's a drain on our system. We should get rid of it. These are a bunch of takers. These people they're becoming dependent on government. All right, let's just fix this real fast. Have any one of these people say that thing. Let's say that let's hope that one of them is a small business owner. And let's hope that they have an open position available. Okay? And let's open this position. Let's say it's a position that requires, let's say it's entry level, just to be fun. We could even do different levels. An entry-level position, they have two positions, an entry-level position, and they have a position that requires 2 to 5 years of experience, 2 to 3 years of experience. Okay? They post that job opening on monster.com or some other job website, and overnight, Mr. Senator, they're going to get 500 applications. I'm not even kidding you. For each position, overnight. This has happened. I know a number of people who've been hiring in the past several years since 2007, 2008. And every single time I've heard about this, somebody offering a job, they are flooded with applications. Flooded, absolutely flooded. People who have no experience, people who have experience. I think the unemployment rate for teenagers is 20% right now. right?
Yeah, it's
There's a
something
ton
ridiculous.
of people out there who want to work, and the idea that these people are just takers because they're on unemployment or because they're on welfare because they can't, it is just every single time there's an open position and 500 people apply, it is proven, it's just proven, right? It doesn't it doesn't seem to hold up in reality. Facts actually matter in reality. Facts should actually have an effect on our ideology. And if our ideology says, well, these people are takers, but the facts say that these people are willing to jump at every single work opportunity you can imagine. I think maybe a lot of people just imagine this welfare person as this, the classic welfare queen, right? The classic woman who has 6 kids and just keeps having kids because it gets them more welfare money, right? By the way, I'm ignoring the actual racial connotations that originally came with the term welfare queen, which is even worse.
Here.
Hello? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, as sort of just a wrap up, my comments for on this subject. Let's, for the purposes of this conversation, say that these people are takers, that they are gaming the system, that they're sitting up eating Cheetos every day, watching Maury, getting a check, going on vacation, and they have a big flat screen TV, and they're living high on the hog off of government dole. Let's just say that, and we're generalizing. We're going to generalize and say every person that takes a welfare check or a SNAP benefit is that person. Solaris, I think we can all say that even if every single person that was taking a welfare benefit or SNAP benefit was a taker, that they are taking a very small piece of the pie, and that no one, or none of the people that are complaining about the small takers are also complaining about the big takers. The people who are taking a whole hell of a lot more from the dole. We spoke about them earlier. Corporations who are receiving subsidies, who are not paying taxes. Now, I'm not a big tax guy, but I do believe that if it's written in the code that you're supposed to pay tax a certain percent, then you're supposed to pay that certain percent. You shouldn't be able to write all kinds of, have some clever way of getting out of paying your tax burden. Meanwhile, the guy who makes $30,000 a year is paying 25%, income tax rate or whatever it is. That's a big taker. These corporations that are not paying their taxes.
Yeah, and individuals.
And we don't talk about the big takers. We talk about the small takers. And the small takers, the real small takers, are but a fraction of the people who are actually getting the small benefits that they're getting every month or every other week or however it comes out.
I think that...
And to me, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Because no one's talking about the big takers.
Well,
we want to talk about takers, let's talk about them all.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic point. There's a rich hypocrisy here about we've got a lot of people who are so concerned about, like something like, was it welfare, like less than it's like 0.01% or something of the federal budget.
Right.
I mean, welfare, the drivers of the federal deficit are emphatically not welfare programs, right? Not even close. I mean, the biggest drivers of the federal deficit, the federal debt, the deficit, and the biggest contributors to the debt over the long run are essentially the war in Iraq, the Bush tax cuts, Social Security, Medicare. That's it, right? You want to talk about the things that contribute. Oh, and the downturn in the economy. The stimulus, very, very little. Believe it or not, very, very little contribution because it was a one-time deal. But Bush tax cuts, huge effect on the total amount of accumulating debt. The 2 wars, war in Iraq, war in Afghanistan, you were spending $1 billion a week there for a period of time. We're not there anymore, but that amount of money racks up. It adds up. You talk about Social Security and Medicaid. Basically healthcare in this country. And not just Social Security is not just healthcare, but for a lot of old people, it becomes very much about healthcare. So for a lot of people, it's really about healthcare. Healthcare costs in this country are a huge issue. But we're not talking about paying somebody food stamps, right?
No.
It's just to me the amazing hypocrisy is the same people who want to cut food stamps are the same people who refused to ask, or even bother to shop at to ask corporations to pay their employees more, or to shop at corporations that pay their employees more. It's this the hypocrisy on this one, Mr. Senator, is just rich, and it's all across the board.
I agree. It's a depressing subject, but it's been a fruitful conversation.
Well, I feel like in many ways, to wrap up this conversation, I say this because I'm genuinely concerned about our country. I really mean this. I'm not running for office. You don't even know who I am, and I don't want you to know who I am. But I am really concerned about, we talk about the American dream. I don't really know what that is. I wasn't born to the idea that there's like some American dream. I kind of thought if you were to succeed, you're kind of lucky anyway. But the very idea, the idea of equality of opportunity to me is very powerful. It's a very powerful concept, and I desperately want to believe that we are capable of giving everybody who wants to work for it a chance. A chance. You don't necessarily get an infinite number of chances. You screw it up, you may not be ever able to recover. And I wish we had second and third chances, but in this case, I'm just concerned that people aren't even going to be given a single chance. You start off at the bottom economic rung, guess where you're going to end up? I don't want that to be our country. I don't want the millennials, and the people who are younger than the millennials, whatever the next generation is going to be, whatever they're called. I don't want them being unemployed until they're 20, 22 or 23, living with their parents, and then they can't. Then they go to college and rack up debt because they think that's what they're supposed to do because there's no jobs. And they get out of college and there's still no jobs. And they struggle every single step of the way. And they're working at places like any place they can get a job, right? Maybe they do work at Walmart. Maybe they do work at McDonald's. I mean, you and I, Mr. Senator, have very similar life experiences in that regard. I worked all throughout undergrad. I worked at all kinds of places. I was a valet parker. I was a coffee maker. I was a bookseller. I did weird stuff to try to make ends meet. But what I'm afraid is that those people are never going to get any further than making the bottom rung. They're going to live out the rest of their life making a grand total of just above poverty wages. And they're not going to be able to have kids without causing serious economic harm to themselves and raising their children in a situation where they're not going to get as much out of life as people who are rich, or even have the same opportunities as those rich children, or even middle class children. It's this cycle, this continuing cycle of people who will never be able to change their station in life because they're never given an opportunity economically, through education, and sometimes just in a matter of health. These kids are never given a chance. They're raised on fast food cheeseburgers because that's what people believe is the only thing they can afford. And that concerns me. I'm very upset. I think this is a problem, and we have got to do something. And I think we keep turning to the government to solve all of our problems. And to a certain extent, I'm not a conservative. I'm not somebody who considers himself to be a conservative, at least not in a labeling sense. But I believe if we're not going to turn to the government, and sometimes that's okay, we shouldn't turn to the government, we've got to turn to ourselves. We have got to ask ourselves, what do we care about? And now, let's avoid this cognitive dissonance. Let's make sure that when I go and spend money, I spend money on things that are consistent with my values. So that are things that are actually helping to achieve the so-called American dream, actually helping to achieve equality of opportunity, the thing that I believe in the most, that we actually lead value-driven lives as opposed to tube socks on sale driven lives. Anything
All
else?
valid points.
Anything else to add, Mr. Senator, before we end the program?
I do not.
Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have just witnessed another episode of We Should Talk. I am glad to have you, and sorry if I came off as ranting a couple times, but as I said at the top of the program, this stuff gets in my craw.
Yeah.
All right, well, you all have a fantastic week. I am Solaris.
I am the Senator.
And this is We Should Talk. Have a great day, everybody.